Hi, I'm Christopher Hine. Today we're going to talk about sparring in Aikido. All right, guys, so today we're going to be talking about sparring in Aikido, and this is a really contentious subject, right? So lots of people have a problem with this. I think there's a ton of reasons why we have these problems with sparring. One of the biggest issues, and it's honestly a hard issue to see, is that sparring literally means struggle, and Aikido is a martial art that attempts to not struggle with anything. So the very act of sparring in lots of ways is the antithesis of what we want to do in Aikido, and perhaps why the founder said that we shouldn't have that kind of competition in Aikido. So one of the many reasons probably, actually. So that's one of the inherent problems. However, Aikido does have some struggle methods, and for those struggle methods, we do need to have some kind of sparring practice. And I'll show you today how you can have a sparring practice for those parts. Another thing to understand is in order to get better at things, you do have to have some kind of live training method. So in order to become proficient at doing Aikido, we have to have some kind of live training. And the trick is the live training can't be sparring because Aikido is not about struggle, it's about something else. So how do we mix all that together? So I'm going to talk a bunch about that today. We're going to see if we can suss some of those problems out. I'm going to call Josh and Maya out here, and we're going to go to work for you guys. Josh, Maya? All right, so talking about sparring. People always want to know about sparring. How does sparring work? It's a difficult subject to discuss in Aikido because sparring is about struggle. Struggle is what makes you better at things, but the idea of Aiki is to never struggle. So how do we get good at something when the way to get good at that thing is actually the antithesis of the something we're trying to do? This is mind-blowing, right? So this is outrageous. How are we going to do this? So I've spent my life trying to figure out this subject, and I have some answers for you. Maybe you'll like the answers, maybe you won't. The most important thing, though, is it doesn't matter if we have the answers. It matters if you have the answers. So you need to do this stuff. You doing it is the goal, right? It doesn't matter that Aikido has some kind of superhero who can do it. We had that superhero years ago, right? His name was Morihei Ueshiba. He apparently could do really amazing things that impressed everyone. Cool, but the rest of us can't do this stuff. So how do we get good at it? That's what this is about. So the whole reason I'm making videos is so you guys can do this stuff and get better at it, and then we can have discourse, right? So we can talk back and forth about how we all get better at it. Okay, so that aside, how do I suggest that we start to get better at it? So the first thing you have to understand is Aikido is broken into two categories. One category is Aiki. The other category is kumiuchi. So there's a bunch of different things we do in Aikido. There's a main division of three. One is ashi or taisabaki, how you use your body. And then we have Aiki and we have kumiuchi. So kumiuchi means struggle methods. It's an old word back in the day in Japan that was synonymous with jujitsu, right? Same kind of things. It means how we're going to struggle back and forth and wrestle around, right? So that's what sparring would be, some kind of struggling methods. Now Aikido actually doesn't want to emphasize the kumiuchi, but we have to have the kumiuchi because sometimes we can't make good Aiki. Aiki is the ability to make an energetic harmony, right? So how to fit our energies together. And I've said in other videos, a conversation is a good way to think about it. How can we have some kind of energetic reaction instead of a physical one? And that energetic reaction is going to keep us safest, right? So energetic reaction can mean understanding what someone's plotting in their head, or to be friendly to someone off the bat so we never get into an argument, or to keep my distance from someone so they can't actually hurt me if they were to try to hurt me, and to keep a good position, and all this stuff. That's the main body of Aikido practice. That's mostly what Aikido practice is about. However, when we look at what's going on, it's easiest to see kumiuchi stuff, right? So in this video, I'm going to have to talk to you guys about what kumiuchi is and what Aiki is, and how we can practice for both of those. But kumiuchi will more likely lend itself to sparring. And right now I'm going to teach you the first three-stage progression. I started using at this school in order to get my guys sparring. And this deals with a bunch of serious issues that you will have as an Aikido school initially beginning to spar. One of the issues is teacher ego, right? So I hate to tell you guys this, but if you've been the teacher, you're the black belt awesome teacher, and everyone super respects you in the school, you are probably very scared to start sparring and fall on your ass and look dumb. It's a real legit fear. I totally understand that fear, especially if you haven't had the luck of being able to do a bunch of stuff in the past, right? So when I started working with my guys on sparring all the time, luckily I had already trained MMA and done some stick fighting and done a bunch of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission wrestling, so I was comfortable in that. And so I just always kept skewing stuff to that so I would look good, right? But you're going to have to get past that, right? You're going to have to accept that, like, no one in Aikido is very good at this stuff in a live situation, and so the way we get good at it is to train it. So first thing you're going to have to get over is teacher ego, right? So that's a real problem. This drill will kind of address teacher ego, and you'll see how we can start to develop some skills. And probably, if you've done a lot of Aikido, you'll catch on a lot quicker than your students anyway, so you'll probably stay ahead of them and you won't have to worry too much. Okay, second thing this deals with is student injury, right? So student injury is a major thing we have to worry about. And let me tell you, I've had many issues with this because you get a group of guys who starts doing live training and then they start getting reckless and then they hurt themselves a bunch and then your guys can't spar all the time anymore and you're back to doing forms training. And then when you think about going back to live training, it's like, oh, are we all going to get hurt again? What's going on? So we have to deal with student injury. Student injury is a real concern. So A, we have teacher ego, how do we deal with that? Second, we have student injury. How do we deal with this issue? So I'm going to teach you my 3-stage progression to start you guys off with sparring, and then we'll go from there and we'll get more complicated drills as we go. So we're going to need some tools. All right, so now we have a wooden knife, and that's what we're going to start off with. And we're going to put Josh in the kumiuchi position because today Josh is representing kumiuchi, struggle, right? All right, so first part of this drill. We're going to start from a katate dori grab. So Maya's going to grab Josh in a katate dori. All right, so this should look really familiar. We do this in Aikido schools all the time. What is it good for? Well, this drill already starts to hash out what it's good for, right? Josh had a weapon in his hand. He needed to use the weapon. She's grabbed his hand to stop him from using the weapon. What's going to happen with this? All right, now, the first part we're training Maya's ability to keep a good grip on Josh and have a flexible body, right? So she's going to have a flexible body when she's doing this. So Maya's not allowed to move her feet, and Josh is allowed to move his feet. And what Josh is going to do is move around Maya and try and find the breaking points of her grip, right? So where are those breaking points in her grip? And right now what Josh is doing is he's taking her right to the edge every time, and then he's letting her set back up to basically a balanced position, right? So as he's moving through, that's all he's doing. Okay, good, very good. All right, now let's talk about what this drill's doing. All right, so this drill's one, it's starting to train Maya how to use her flexibility in her body to compensate for what Josh is doing. So she's not working on grip strength or anything. She's just using flexibility in her body to track what Josh is up to. Okay, second thing we're training Josh is where he can move that her grip's right about to break. So he's learning what positions he can be in that her grip's about to break. All right, now this is a mellow practice, right? And Josh, not to try and break her grip all the time, but try and get right to the edge of where her grip breaks and then stop there and move to a new position. Now, Maya's also told not to move her feet. So what happens is we get a semi-live practice starting to happen. It's not really live, but we're starting to get these guys moving in that kind of way and exploring and learning and thinking about things. And so this is a good practice to start people off. No one's going to get hurt doing this, and people can start to understand what's going on. Plus, at this point, if our egos start to kick in too much, we can say, hey, that's not the practice, right? You know, so if you're trying to super hold down or lock with 2 hands or something crazy, well, that's just not the practice, right? So mellow out. So get your guys doing something like this. Okay, now, second part of this progression starts in the exact same position, the katate dori grip, and now what's going to happen is Josh is not allowed to move his feet, but he's going to move as explosively as he can and try and break Maya's grip. Okay, now Maya is allowed to move her feet in this drill. So as Josh moves, Maya can try to compensate, right? Okay, so as he goes through, he's trying to get free, Maya's trying to stick with him. Excellent. All right, great. Okay, so now what this half of the drill, or this part of the drill is doing, is it's doing the opposite sets for each of these guys, right? Now Maya's learning to move her feet with her flexible body, whereas before she wasn't. She was just dependent upon the flexible body. But there's a part where your body's going to break, right? So your grip will break, and that's what we explored before. But now Maya can move her feet to compensate for that. We're also teaching Josh to go right for the kill, right? How to explode and pop his hand free. So now Josh is doing different than he did before, not trying to find the perfect angle, but just trying to use explosive action. This also means that Mai is having to train for this explosive action as well. So now we're getting these guys doing something that is truly live. It's truly an explosion to try and escape, and Mai's trying to compensate for that, right? So now you can see we filled in the gaps, the problems we were having with the second practice. Again, though, we have basically a pretty safe practice. Now, this practice will bruise your ego some, but Josh has got such a nice advantage that you just got to accept that the guy with the knife's probably going to get free most of the time. So if your ego's getting too bruised, you can go, well, it's so stacked against me that, you know, and look, the truth is you're going to have to get over your ego eventually, and that's what we're building towards, but it's going to hurt at first, so we're trying to ease you into that. Okay, so that's the second stage on this progression. Third stage on this progression is they're going to start in an katate dori grip again. Okay, now Josh is allowed to move, and I would suggest that you tell your students the first times you do this, he's not going to try to go as explosively as before, but he still should be moving pretty good. And Maya is allowed to move, so they're both allowed to move their feet wherever they want, and Josh is simply going to get free, or try to get free, and Maya is going to try to get to stay with him, right? So here we go. Excellent. All right, good. Okay, now we start to have a really fun practice, and that's a very fun practice that's live. It's got all kinds of live stuff going on. Now, is it extreme? Absolutely not extreme. You're probably going to get 0 injuries off of this, right? It's pretty reasonable. The injuries you get will be stupidity injuries, right? So people jabbing themselves in the head with the knife because they're not used to moving with the knife. People pulling the knife into their body because they're stupid and not used to doing that. These will be things that suss out all the beginning problems you're going to have. So this is a really basic practice to get through. I would recommend, if you've never done any sparring in your school, to work on this 3-stage progression for a while, right? So get your students doing it till it's really comfortable, and so you can generally just jump into stage 3 and no one's going to be going crazy and attacking each other. Now, when we're talking about like high stress situations, you will need that to get good, but at first you don't want to have a lot of that because these guys aren't used to taking the kind of explosive action. They're going to hurt each other. So don't let them hurt each other at first. Ease them into it. This 3-stage progression is really good. Okay, now, this 3-stage progression, once you've done it for a while, this can begin to get into what we call Kaishiwaza. And so when I started working with the guys in the garage years ago, after they could all do this pretty well, then what I did was I transitioned us into what we call Kaishiwaza. In Japanese, kaishi means to turn over. So the idea of this practice is to turn over who's doing what. That's the actual goal in this practice, is to turn it over, turn it over, turn it over. Now again, I have a little progression that we use to get us up to a full Kaishiwaza. And this progression is built to get skills as we go in the safest manner possible so we're not getting a ton of injuries, right? So I don't want a ton of injuries from our guys. Okay, Kaishiwaza is going to start again from this practice, okay? Now, we could say the beginning practice was a Kaishiwaza practice, the one we just did, the stage 3 for the last practice, but it's really not. It's more a Hadoki practice, an escaping practice. But now we're actually going to add the idea of Kaishi. So as they're moving, and just move kind of slow right now, so this is just so I can talk about it and you guys can kind of watch them move. Okay, what's going to happen in this is Maya is allowed to try and get basic disarms. So as they're moving around, Maya's trying to work a disarm. Now the second she works a disarm, she begins the practice just like before. They go to a katate grip, and then she begins to try and get free. And as they're working this, Josh tries to get the disarm. Okay, so he's working around, working around. Now Josh got the knife. Now he comes in, right? So sorry, we're going to be at a katate dori every time, right? So this is our basic practice, right? And they're going a couple steps ahead, but that's okay. All right, so you guys see the idea. All right. So that's what's going to happen with this practice is that we start in a katate dori every time. The Hadoki stuff's still happening, so the guy with the knife is trying to make Hadoki, but the other person is allowed to go into disarms. Now, what you want to start to watch at this phase, and we'll get into this, but at this phase, we shouldn't see Maya going into any kind of marote for extended periods of time. So show marote Maya for extended period of time, right? So see how she's got 2-on-1, and then what's going to tend to happen is from this, you're going to get this person who's got a lot of ego. They're going to start to go like this and hold it for a long time, and then Josh is trying to make Hadoki, and this person's just doing this, and nothing's happening, right? So that's not skill developing, right? It's just force developing, right? And we can do that later. It's a fair part of this practice, but in the beginning, watch that, right? So as they're going, and Josh is trying to make his Hadoki, and Maya's trying to get the disarm. If Maya goes into some kind of locked up position at some point, it's like, hey, that's not the practice, guys. Go ahead and let go of that, right? Okay. Also, a thing you're going to have to watch for in this practice is people not going back to the katate dori grip. So if Josh makes his Hadoki in this, right, so he is really trying to get free the whole time, then what he does is he plays this game. This is not quite the game. This is what I mean. So Josh makes his Hadoki, okay, and then he goes, come on, get the knife. Come on. Come on. I'm knife fighting guy, right? Okay, so this is what tends to happen a lot is you want to play out a fantasy and pretend like you're Steven Seagal in the movies, okay? You're not Steven Seagal in the movies, right? This is not a movie, it's a dojo and you're training, and so that's not what's going on. So you got to watch that tendency to do that. So that's why at this stage, they're just putting their arm back out there and the other person gets to grab it, and we don't go until they've got to this stage. Sometimes if I get guys who are really amped up, I will tell one of them to get to say go, right? So for example, if they're in that katate dori, Maya gets to say when they go. And then they're working. Josh is trying to get free. Maya's trying to find disarms. Just like that. If Josh gets free, he gives her back the hand. Exactly what happens. All right, good. So you see, that's this basic practice. Okay, now how do we begin to amp this up? Okay, once they can do this successfully and we're getting nice, clean disarms and there's a back and forth, a little back and forth happening, then what we're going to do is the ability to switch the knife for this guy, right? Okay, so as they're going here, she's got Josh. Josh starts moving. Okay, Josh can switch knife hands anytime he wants. Okay, so now he switched the knife hand. And now Maya's trying to get it with the new knife hand, right? Going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Josh switched knife hands again. Okay, good. All right, now at this stage is when we can start to talk about playing this knife fighting game, right? Okay, now that will come up for Josh a lot because, or Maya, whoever's got the knife, right? When she switches knife hands. Okay, there. Now, she could try and keep Josh away, which would be a successful strategy if the goal was to train Maya to be a murderer with knives. But right now, that's not the goal of this drill. Okay, so what Maya's going to do, instead of just giving him a katate, she's going to start to slowly shoot her hand in there. And this is going to give Josh the ability to get a basic defense and go back into working his disarms, right? So that's what we're going back and back, forth, through, forth, okay? So you can see, this is the idea of the practice is that every time you get an escape, you're going to kind of give it back to him. Now look, that's not the ultimate. We're going to get to the ultimate where you're really working that knife. But in this set of drills, we can't work on that. So as another important thing when you start teaching people how to have a live practice is you can't just go to the ultimate 10 right away, right? So we've got to build up, right? And this is going to give us the skills and the ability to stay injury-free, which is what we want for our practice here, right? Okay, once we're switching around, then we can start to add in other things, and this is where it's going to get real exciting for everybody, but you have to have guys who are going to be pretty sane at this point, right? So if anyone's flipping out, you relegate them to a lower level practice and you don't let them go to this, right? And flipping out means that they're crazy and they think that they're some ninja and they're trying to flip someone or punch them or something crazy, which is not what this practice is right now, okay? So in this next practice, we're going to start in the exact same way, but while they're going, they're allowed to use any Aikido techniques that facilitate the goal. Let me say that again. Facilitate the goal. Now, why I'm saying this is because Josh doesn't want to just throw Maya so he feels good about throwing, like, oh, cool. But if any techniques come up that enable him to get free and use the knife, which is the goal, he wants to be free and autonomous with the knife, then he can use that technique, right? So if shionages or kokyunages or koshinages or whatever come up, okay, then they come up. All right, I'm going to get out of here and we're going to see if we can get these guys to do a few of those. Okay, so that is what we would call a Kaishiwaza practice in our school, and just means a turnover practice. And it's because the objective is to turn that knife over. And the person with the knife is trying to get free, but it's not a Hadoki practice, right? An escaping practice, and we have those. You can definitely see those on the videos. But that's not the main goal, although he's working it intermittently. And as he gets free, you pretty much kind of just give it back to him. And you can give it back to him with kind of a grandiose strike, so that way it's pretty easy to deal with. But the objective is not to play knife fighter right now, right? There will be other drills to play knife fighter. But the objective of this right now is just to learn these kinds of skills, which is turnover skills. This is a good practice. It will get heated at your dojo. You notice these guys did a good job of flowing. It's because they've done it for a long time. It won't look like this at first in your school. So you want to get up to this stage, and once you get up to this stage, you can add harder practices, right? So once they can regularly flow with each other, then we can start to add more wrestling practices. Naturally, they're going to want to go as fast and wrestle as much as possible with the other drills. So you've got to divorce them of that, right? So the idea is always to train them to use less force in training and more technical skill and Aiki ability, right? So that's what we're always trying to get towards, is that. They will naturally get to deal with struggling all the time, because it's going to happen, right? Especially new students come in, it'll be great, because once you've got some students who are kind of advanced to this, when new people come in, they're going to try all kinds of crazy wrestling stuff, and then you can get the experience of dealing with that from a flowing state. Okay, next, I'm going to talk about my 6-stage progression, because I think it's really useful. So once you want to start adding more wrestling in, we can work on this 6-stage progression. Now, we've already made a video on it, so I'm not going to talk about it at length, but in this set that I think is really good, our starter 3 set, followed by a Kaishiwaza practice, followed by the 6-stage progression. To me, this is what I would recommend for starting out your kumiuchi practice, right? So our struggle practice in Aikido, and this is how you're going to develop those basic skills. So the basic idea of this is Josh is going to have the stick here. Maya is going to grab both sides of the stick like this. The very first stage in this progression is Josh has a really loose grip, and she finds the best ways to get it out. Second stage is Josh holds it as hard as he can, and Maya again tries to get it out, trying to use as little explosive powers as possible. Third stage, Josh is going to dynamically move his arm around. So as she moves, Josh is going to dynamically move that arm around to try and stop her. She tries to get it free. Fourth stage, he's going to be able to turn his grip over. So as she's trying to get it out of the hand, he can turn his grip over and try and re-grab it. Okay? Fifth stage, Josh is going to intermittently switch hands. So he's going to go through and intermittently switch hands. So as she moves through, he's going to get that other hand in there, only one hand at a time, but he's going to be able to switch to keep a hold of that weapon. Sixth and final stage, once this starts, right, so the second Maya starts to move, then Josh is going to add his second hand, and they're wrestling over the stick. Let's see what that looks like. Time. Okay, so that was the 6-stage progression. You guys can link, I'll put a link right here for you guys. That I've got a whole video just talking about that 6-stage progression and going into it. But what's important is you notice at the end of that 6-stage progression, they're actually wrestling over the knife, right? So it's a little bit more of an extreme practice where they're actually physically using as much force as they can to get the weapon free. Now that ideally is not good Aikido. In fact, a lot of times I'll refer to this kind of stuff as Aikido adjacent, because it's not really the systematic approach that Aikido wants to use. We're only looking at a tiny fraction of what is Aikido when we're looking at that stuff. But that is the way you'll have to train kumiuchi. So kumiuchi is sparring, grappling, struggle stuff. So we've got to be able to get good at that in case our Aiki fails. But that's not where we should put the majority of our practice. If you want to put the majority of your practice there, you should just study jiu-jitsu, right? Go to a good jiu-jitsu school or judo school and work on that kind of stuff, because if you want to just master that practice, those schools will be better at teaching you that stuff than any Aikido school will. But Aikido is teaching you to do it in a brief moment so you can get free and reset your Aikido strategies. So this is going to be a two-parter. In the next series, we'll talk about Aiki and live practice for Aiki and why sparring practices don't really work for that and why the majority of your practice shouldn't be sparring practices. But you guys will have to understand this stuff in order to have a complete view of Aikido. So this stuff was about struggle and sparring in Aikido. I hope it illuminated it to you. This is what I use to get our school going, right? So that 3-stage starter progression is really good. That slowly can turn into Kaishiwaza, which is really good. And that can turn into that 6-stage progression, which will give us a lot of skills when someone's actually physically trying to wrestle and stop you, which will give people experience with violent, serious action, which is what we want. All right, I'm Christopher Hine. Thanks a lot. Stay tuned for part 2.